We provide a variety of services including leadership development, business strategy, organizational development, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion support, coaching, and data analytics. And we look forward to discussing this important topic with you today. The topics for today's webinar include defining and practicing self-management, self-awareness, self-regulation, self-motivation, and empathy. We want to make sure we understand how to use and effectively manage our emotions. We'll discuss how to verbally communicate with others and how to successfully communicate with others in a non-verbal manner. We'll identify the benefits of emotional intelligence. We'll relate emotional intelligence to the workplace. And we'll also talk about how to balance optimism and pessimism. And finally, we'll be discussing how to effectively impact others. Let's take a quick look at the history of emotional intelligence in terms of how we arrived at this place. Way back in 1930, Edward Thorndike introduced and wrote about the concept of social intelligence. By 1940, David Wechsler talked about the components of intelligence, which includes IQ as well as early discussions of EQ, even though I don't believe he called it that. By 1950, Albert Maslow talked about emotional strength. Now, as we start to get closer to what we think of now as emotional intelligence, in 1975, Howard Gardner talked about the concept of multiple intelligences. In 1985, Wayne Payne introduced the term emotional intelligence. And by 1987, Keith Beasley introduces the emotional quotient, which is a measure of emotional intelligence. And then, of course, in 1995, Daniel Goleman talked about emotional intelligence and why it can matter more than IQ, more than the intelligence quotient. So as you look at these folks, what were they talking about? Edward Thorndike was talking about comparative psychology and learning processes. Did a lot of studies involving animals, and he also discussed the law of effect theory. And then finally, this concept of social intelligence, where responses closely followed by satisfaction become attached to the situation. Situations followed by discomfort have weaker attachments. So you can see some of the habits we may have, some of the ways we think about things and react to certain things involve whether or not they made us feel good or they made us not feel so good. David Wechsler developed one of the first standardized intelligence tests. The Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children was published in 1949 and then revised in 1974. His concepts revolve around his belief that intelligence involves the abilities necessary to succeed in life. So now think about that. Not just how smart you are or how well versed you are in a particular subject, but intelligence also involves the abilities necessary to succeed in life. Maslow introduced what he calls the hierarchy of needs. And I'll start at the bottom, or the most basic need of humans is the physiological, breathing, food, water, sleep, homeostasis, or in other words, balance. And then as we move up that ladder, the next need is safety, physical and psychological security, mortality, health, property. The next rung of the ladder is love and belonging in terms of friendships, family, and intimacy issues. Fourth is self-esteem, being confident, focusing on achievement, respect of yourself, and respect by others. And then finally, the highest level in terms of this hierarchy of needs is self-actualization, morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, lack of prejudice, and acceptance of facts. Howard Gardner, as we mentioned earlier, talked about the concept of multiple intelligences. He described how that's impacted by your ability to use and understand words, language, and writing. How logical are you? Your interpersonal skills, your intrapersonal skills, which include introspection and self-reflection, which is basically self-management and self-awareness, musical skills, visual, spatial skills, reading and writing, being able to solve puzzles or other problems, naturalistic skills, and also how well versed you are in terms of physical movements and motor control. So he really starts to talk there about the connection between the physical self and your emotional self, your mental self, and your spiritual self. And we'll talk about those as we discuss self-awareness. So it's important to know this history, and it's important to understand the science behind emotional intelligence. And this isn't just some fad or something somebody thought of a few years ago and they're making some money off of it. These are things that are even today being studied to understand the importance of emotional intelligence. So some of these thoughts go all the way back to at least 1930 and beyond. And we'll be discussing those in some form or fashion as we walk through the four aspects or four phases, whatever you want to call it, of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence consists of four main areas. And the first area we'll talk about is called self-management. There are 5 points that we need to be aware of when we talk about self-management. How to set goals, how to make good decisions, how to plan, how to schedule, and then once the tasks are completed, how to evaluate these methods. First, being consistent. Part of managing oneself is the ability to be stable. The values you hold dear should always be transparent. Always changing can not only cause others to question your beliefs, but it can also cause you to become confused about what you truly believe. Second, sticking to the plan. If you're scheduled to complete a particular task, just do it. Don't just do it, but make sure it's done in a timely manner. It is easy to feel out of control when you disregard the plan that you're supposed to be following. Third, be accountable. There are times when things don't work out as you plan, but you have to be able to admit that and then be flexible enough to get things back on track. The ideal result is that you easily bounce back and complete the task. But even during those times when this is not the case, you expect yourself to be able to adjust. 4, educate yourself. Be a continuous learner. We live in an ever-changing world and you want to be able to keep up with it. Don't let change pass you by. Embrace it. Be an avid reader. Be an avid learner. Talk and listen to mentors and peers. They may know something that could help you along your journey. And finally, stay physically fit. Many people don't think of staying fit when they talk about self-management, but it is a very important part of being able to practice the 4 preceding points. Exercising your body is just as crucial to self-management as exercising your mind. A body that is not well rested, nutritionally fed, or physically exercised can lead to emotional and physical illness. The second aspect of emotional intelligence that we will discuss today is called self-awareness. Being aware of oneself is the ability to accurately perceive one's skills, knowledge, value, and responsibilities. It's about being confident in what you have to offer, both personally and professionally. Self-awareness is not only important for your self-esteem, but it is also the first step to the process of full acceptance of change. Without understanding why one thinks the way he thinks or why he acts the way he acts, he may never fully appreciate himself or see the importance of making changes to improve. Self-awareness gives power and a sense of peace and happiness. This newly found strength will more than likely carry over into your work life in terms of how you perform your duties, as well as how you interact with others. A lack of self-awareness can cause you not to realize your worth in your organization or even the quality of work you perform. This can have even more dramatic effects when you hold a leadership position. Not only will you have doubts about yourself, but the people you lead will also begin to question your competence, which could ultimately lead to a lack of leadership effectiveness. The third aspect of emotional intelligence we'll discuss today is called self-regulation, and it's really another term for self-control. And we'll define that as the ability to control one's emotions, desires, and behaviors in order to reach a positive outcome. Self-regulation is sometimes difficult because of the phenomenon that it is important to express how you feel. While this may be partially true, the art of finding a balance between expressing your feelings and avoiding unnecessary tension is self-regulation. Self-regulation is a direct reflection of the type of pressure you might be experiencing. And there are 3 types of pressure to consider. 1, good pressure. This type of pressure is the result of an aggressive yet non-critical and non-harmful atmosphere. One aspires to be like the people around him or her, and this motivation leads to the acquisition of self-regulation. Bad pressure. Bad pressure is when the atmosphere is critical and harmful. You might have no motivation to control your emotions or desires, and thus you have a loss of self-regulation. And then finally, there's no pressure. When one is not experiencing any pressure, he or she tends to act based on emotions, since there is no one to compare him or herself to. The fourth and final aspect of emotional intelligence that we'll talk about today is self-motivation. And Andrew Carnegie said it best with his quote, "People who are unable to motivate themselves must be content with mediocrity. no matter how impressive their other talents are. Now, this is important to understand because self-motivation in terms of success is an essential part of excelling at life, at work, at whatever you are trying to accomplish. You must learn to motivate yourself because you cannot depend on others to do it for you. You have to know how to encourage yourself regardless of how bad the situation might be or seem to be. Now, there are several keys to building self-motivation. 1, always work toward a cause. Why am I doing this? 2, don't compare yourself to others. 3, make a conscious effort to not give up. 4, don't live in your past failures or successes. 5, utilize positive thinking. In the words of Henry Ford, if you think you can't, you probably won't. Now, there are times you may need motivation in order to get motivated. Positive thinking may not be doing the trick. What are some things you can do? Well, consider some suggestions. Write down your plan for improvement. Make your plan not so much a hope or a wish, but a real living document that you can refer back to. Briefly, think about your past successes. If I did it once, I can certainly do it again. And third, read books or articles that promote self-motivation. Make sure you understand how to motivate yourself. Now let's discuss some of the tools or skills that are needed to become more emotionally intelligent. And let's start with empathy. Empathy is sharing the feelings of others, whether joy or sadness. In order for empathy to work, a person must first be able to recognize, classify, and understand their own feelings. Carl Rogers describes empathy in this way: to perceive the internal frame of reference of another with accuracy and with the emotional components and meanings which pertain thereto as if one were the person, but without ever losing the as if condition. Thus, it means to sense the hurt or the pleasure of another as you are sensing it, and to perceive the causes as that other person might be perceiving them, but without ever losing the recognition that it is as if I were hurt or pleased, and so forth. So empathy is most useful when one is empathizing based on experience of a variety of feelings. For example, a boss who was once passed over for promotion generally finds it easier to identify with another person who is passed over for a promotion. Not only is this comforting for the person who is going through that situation, but it's also good for the empathizer because it strengthens their ability to positively react to negative situations. Now, this is not simple. The ideal situation would be for a person to express their issues and you to empathize with them, but the fact is, many people aren't always so forthcoming with their problems, even when it's obvious that something is going wrong. Since this is the case, you may be forced to ask probing questions or to read between the lines of what is said. Now, you can also focus on nonverbal cues such as body language. So when it comes to empathy, we have to realize first that everyone is not like us. Everyone might not be experiencing things the way we might experience them. And if you're a leader, in some cases, maybe in many cases, you have been promoted to or assigned to this leadership task because you may have superior abilities as an individual contributor or a subject matter expert. And you shouldn't expect everyone to live up to that level of competence. So you need to see people based on where they are and be willing to accept them as they are and figure out how can you help them be a better part of your team. And one of the things I'd like to leave you with regarding empathy is don't just follow the golden rule, which most of us understand as treating people the way we would like to be treated, but utilize the platinum rule, and as much as possible, treat people the way they would like to be treated. Another part of being empathetic is being able to accurately perceive the emotions of others as well as ourselves. We have to remember that words are only one part of the message that we want to understand, that we want to perceive. We need to also understand how we are reacting emotionally when we are trying to understand the emotions of others. In other words, we want to make sure we are continually being mindful, not only of our emotions, but the emotions of those we are interacting with. Use your emotions to facilitate thinking. Now that's a profound statement, but we need to remember that how we feel determines how we view situations. And it also determines how others view situations. If you are in a happy mood, everyday events typically don't seem that bad. On the contrary, if you're not in a happy mood, even the smallest situations can seem major to you. When it comes to the workplace, regardless of your mood, your boss expects you to be a high performer. So make it easy on yourself and choose to be in a good mood. Now, one of the ways to do that is making sure we understand emotional meanings. The underlying reason for why we feel the way we do is very important to understand. If you know you're unhappy or why you're unhappy, you can either alter the thing that is making you that way or consciously tell yourself that particular thing is not worth allowing you to be upset. And that can ultimately turn your negative mood into a positive one. Having this understanding can not only be used to internally gauge yourself, but can also help you with how to interact with coworkers. I hope you are starting to see how important it is to understand our emotions, deal with our emotions, and empathize with others in order to understand how their emotions may be affecting them. That is a critical step in the path of improving your emotional intelligence. And while we'll talk about this some more later in this webinar, let's now switch to a discussion of verbal communication skills. Strong verbal communication skills are critical to your success in all facets of life. How you get your point across. How do you make people understand you? How do you communicate what your needs and desires are? How persuasive are you? All of these points are critical to your success, and that's why it's such an important part of emotional intelligence. The first area we want to talk about in terms of communication skills is focused or active listening. not only do you want to make sure you're not multitasking as you're trying to communicate with others, but that you are focused on the conversation at hand. And that means, particularly in this world of technology and things beeping and trying to get your attention, that focus is even more critical than ever. So for instance, if you're a leader, or even if you're just working on a team and somebody comes to your desk and they want to talk to you, and you've got a computer sitting right here, and that's where I usually have mine in my office. It's on, it beeps every time somebody sends an email or requests a meeting, and even a momentary glance toward that computer sends the message to whoever you're communicating with that you are not focused on them. And even though you may not realize it, you are not being as conscious about what is happening as you might otherwise be if you didn't have that. So think about how you communicate with others and ask yourself, are you a good focused or active listener? Turn off that computer. Make the screen, blank the screen. Turn off those sounds that tell you you just got another email. Turn off the phone. Do things that won't interrupt in any way your ability to be a focused listener. The next tool is asking questions. And the more open-ended they are, the better. That will give you a more robust sense of what somebody's trying to share with you. One of the tools I like to propose is being an appreciative communicator, using appreciative inquiry to ask questions that aren't so much to advocate a position in every case, but to understand what is trying to be communicated to you. That will make it easier for you to compose better feedback, better questions, and at the end, have a better understanding of what this interaction was all about. Basically, we want to communicate with flexibility and authenticity. We want the listener to believe we're being open and transparent, that we're being honest, that we're sharing when we can share. If you're a leader and your team asks you a question and you don't know the answer, I'll get back to you. If you can't share the answer because you've been directed not to share some plan or some strategy until further notice or until next week, then say that. Once you can get that level of trust with your team, with those around you, particularly with those following you, you'll do a better job as a communicator, as a leader, and you'll improve the level of trust to the point that all communications are easier than they might otherwise be. So as we talk about communication, you probably noticed that we're talking about some nonverbal communication. And that's happening no matter what. People are seeing you, they're watching you, maybe even subconsciously, for those nonverbal cues you are giving. So not only do we have to understand that words matter, our nonverbal cues matter as well. That may be even more important than verbal communication, at least based on research that says as much as 90% of communication is nonverbal. If you walk in a room with a group of employees, for instance, and you look like you're in a bad mood or you're grumpy, and maybe you are, and then you talk about how wonderful things are, there's going to be a certain level of wonder, is she really telling us the truth? She doesn't seem to be sincere about it. What's really happening? That's what's going on in the minds of the people that are watching and listening to you. And again, maybe even subconsciously. But that will drive their reaction to what they heard, not only verbally, but non-verbally. So let's get back to emotions and talk about how to understand a situation through the eyes of others while we're strengthening self-management and self-awareness skills. Remember, the ability to keep our emotions under control requires more than a willing heart. It takes practice, and it takes some of the tools we'll talk about now. First, how do we see the other side? Well, one of the best ways is to ask other people. Ask them what they think. This is a great way to eliminate blind spots, things that others see that you might not be seeing. If we ever want to understand the type of person we are and how we behave, ask someone else. In some cases, it is easy for us to justify the things we do, so much so that it seems like everything we do is perfect, or at least we can justify why we're doing things that way. If we want to take an honest look at ourselves, you would probably say not only is this perfection untrue, but it's unattainable. Nobody's perfect. Talk to your boss, your co-workers, or friends about how they view you. If someone says, when everything is good, you're a great person, but if something doesn't go your way, you have an explosive temper. Don't get upset and don't automatically say that that is untrue. Gaining this insight is a valuable tool for you to help regulate your emotions. Your emotions and how to express them is your responsibility. If you don't like it, fix it. Now, one of the tools you can use in the workplace especially, but in other places as well, is 360-degree feedback. And if you decide to use this tool, remember, don't get upset about what you might see when others share how they view you. Simply ask yourself, could this be true? And if it's not true, why is their perception that way? This is the first step in terms of changing the way you behave and how you deal with others in a way that will help you be successful. Self-management can sometimes be a hard quality to tame when self-awareness produces a self-centered or arrogant result. The strength to self-management and self-awareness lies in the balance between the two. Understanding who you are, the role you play, the authority you possess are all important. But when these things overshadow your ability to be consistent and accountable, this could cause a poor outcome. By the same token, if one lacks an understanding of who they are and their importance, this could also hinder their ability to be consistent and accountable. People who are aware of their methods of dealing with conflict and understand the bearing of the way they are doing things aren't as likely to make matters worse as compared to those who are not aware of themselves. Another tool in terms of self-management and self-awareness is understanding how to compromise. Compromise is an unavoidable part of dealing with others in both the business world and in personal relationships. Now, I don't know about you, but maybe the ideal situation would be that everyone agrees with everything you say, but that's highly unlikely. And unless you live in a society that does not value diplomacy, this is a skill that will present lots of opportunities for you to master it. This can be even more of an issue if you are in a position of less influence. You may be expected to compromise at a greater level, or even expected to follow the lead of your superiors without regard to your own feelings or opinions. In either case, learning how to have your beliefs while accepting the ideas of others and not causing tension in the relationship is crucial to your success in the workplace. So one of the recommendations I have is to seek first to understand. That's one of Covey's 7 habits that he wrote about in several of his books. Understand why somebody might be suggesting a certain path. And depending on your level of authority or your position, be able to ask questions. So in order to make sure you have a better understanding of what's being communicated. So in this chaotic world of work and dealing with pressures at home and potentially kids or other family issues, how do we gain control of our emotions, of our thoughts, of our feelings in ways that support our ability to be successful, that support our ability to be more emotionally intelligent? How do we cope with our thoughts that might not be appropriate to share or to react to based on what's going on? The first step is to take a deep breath. Maybe step away from the issue if possible, and to use positive thinking. So earlier we talked about self-awareness and the 4 areas of self, and one of those is the physical self. So we should not forget about this. So one of the things we can do is understand relaxation techniques and make sure we know or understand that they're not simply useful in order to make us feel better, but they actually play a major role in reducing the stresses on our bodies and minds that come from the experiences of everyday life. In other words, relaxation techniques can not only help our physical body, but they can help our thoughts, our emotions, and the way we react to them. So according to the Mayo Clinic, relaxation techniques can help to slow your heart rate, lower your blood pressure, slow your rate of breathing, increase blood flow to major muscles, reduce muscle tension and chronic pain, improve concentration, reduce the levels of anger and frustration, and boost confidence when attempting to handle problems. So there are 3 types of relaxation techniques that we'll talk about. Autogenic. This technique uses the senses to promote relaxation. For example, you might think about a peaceful place and then use relaxed breathing. Or you might repeat words in your mind to help you do away with muscle tension. The progressive muscle technique. In this technique, individuals purposely tense and then relax each muscle group. And then third, the visualization technique. With visualization, the individual imagines a calming place and tries to utilize his or her senses to feel like they are really at that place. Now, one specific area where you can use these relaxation techniques, if you have to do a presentation of some sort and you feel nervous or uneasy, use these techniques to help yourself relax a few minutes before you're ready to start. If you're participating in some physical activity, a sporting event or competition of some sort, singing, you're a wannabe comedian and you're going to the comedy club. All of these techniques can help you do a better job. So we want to bring all of these techniques together in order to help ourselves become more emotionally intelligent. We want to be able to relax when we're confronted with difficult situations. We want to think positively in order to use our brains to eliminate or push aside negative thoughts which may be causing tension or may be driving us to react in ways that aren't best for us, that aren't best in terms of making us successful. We want to make sure that we are not allowing negativity or negative thoughts or feelings or emotions to get in the way of our success. Now, one of the things that I do want to mention for sure is these thoughts, these emotions, they are valid. We can't stop them from happening. But it's important for us to understand them and understand how to deal with them so we can react successfully, positively, when they do occur. As previously stated, our emotions are valid. Having emotions are also an inherent part of all human beings. Understanding our emotions and learning how to use them is the responsibility of all of us. Many times it may feel like the workplace is no place for emotions, good or bad. But the truth is, emotions must be utilized. For example, if you are the manager and your team is about to miss an important deadline, it's up to you to stress how necessary it is for you and your team to meet the deadline. The approach you take is determined in part by your natural tendencies as well as the level of professionalism you may have. One level-headed approach may be to call the team to a meeting and explain the ramifications of not meeting the deadline. This would also be a good time to listen to the team members to find out if there is something out of their control that is preventing them from doing their job. A less calm and more volatile method would be to yell at everyone and tell them to get to work. Deciding which style is best can be done by weighing the pros and cons of each, as well as which style would result in the most positive outcome, not only immediately, but for the future. So don't rely solely on how you feel, but what makes logical sense for the long-term health and productivity of your team. So when we think about emotional intelligence, think of the fact that it plays a vital role in the workplace. How one feels about himself or herself, how you interact with others, how you handle conflict is directly reflected in the quality of work produced. Both social and personal proficiencies are developed as a result of emotional intelligence. So what are some of the social proficiencies? Empathy, being aware of others' feelings and exhibiting compassion. Intuition, an inner sense of the feelings of others. Political acumen, the ability to communicate, to influence, leadership skills, and conflict resolution. And finally, personal proficiencies, self-awareness, understanding your own emotions, and your ability to assess yourself, as well as being able to display confidence. Self-regulation, how to manage your emotions, how to maintain trustworthiness and flexibility. And finally, motivation, being optimistic about situations and having the drive to commit until completion. Aristotle once said that the sign of an intelligent person is one who is able to listen but not necessarily agree. So we need to understand how to disagree constructively, how to disagree in a positive and productive manner. Its purpose is not to disagree for the sake of disagreeing or simply getting your point across. It is also not used to be negative or destructive of another's thoughts. The workplace is a place where disagreeing is a common occurrence. Organizations look for the most effective ways to carry out operations and therefore invest in process improvement strategies, which simply opens the door for discussion and compromise. What does constructively disagreeing look like in practice? Well, it's acknowledging and confirming someone else's ideas before presenting your own. An example, because of the nature of their duties, I feel the customer service phone team should arrive 30 minutes before their shift to bring up their systems, test their equipment, and make sure it's properly working so they are ready to take the first call as soon as their shift starts. Counterpoint. I understand your point, and I agree the phone team should arrive early to prepare themselves for the start of the shift. However, I feel 15 minutes is sufficient time for them to get everything in place. Now, a third part of this discussion may simply be, if they're going to arrive 15 minutes before their shift or 30 minutes before their shift, maybe they should get paid for that time. Maybe that should become part of their shift. They'll provide better customer service. They won't feel like they're working with no compensation. As an organization or company, we won't be potentially violating the law. But this is the kind of constructive conversation that needs to take place once you hear the person out. One of the things that happens in many cases, hey, I think people should come in 30 minutes before their shift in order to make sure their equipment is ready. Well, I disagree. They don't need to do that. It doesn't make any difference, and we rarely have any problems. We want to come to some compromise that is best for the organization and the employees within that organization in order to be more successful. And that's a big part of being emotionally intelligent. Another question you want to ask yourself is, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Optimism, or possessing the quality of optimism, is the ability to find the bright side of every situation. This is an admirable position that not all of us have. The secret to exhibiting this characteristic is to understand that there are no issues that cannot have a positive spin. Not only is this beneficial for an individual's personal life, but optimism can be a competitive advantage in the business world. Like every other entity, businesses suffer losses and setbacks, but the trick to maintaining the stability of a company is leadership that knows how to look past the current problem to a nearby resolution. Optimistic employees tend to be more productive in terms of quality and quantity, and therefore they are more productive and make more money for the organizations that they're working in. Who wants to follow a leader that whimpers at the sight of trouble, just like the people she is leading? Not many people can honestly say they desire this type of leader. Optimism is also good for your health. There have been several studies performed that conclude those who live life with a bright outlook generally live longer than those who do not. Optimists are also likely to have more long-lasting and successful personal and professional relationships. Pessimism is the exact opposite of optimism. Instead of viewing the glass as half full or having a positive outlook on situations, pessimists can only see the downside of the issue. As you would expect, pessimism in the workplace can be very detrimental to the individual's career growth and well-being of the organization as a whole. A pessimist who holds a leadership role can bring down the productivity and morale of the team just by his or her very nature. An individual contributor with this type of attitude may never get promoted to leadership positions. What about the health factors associated with pessimism? Pessimists generally suffer a lot of bodily and mental stress, including heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. So what's the moral of the story? Don't worry, be happy. Now, some of you may be saying, how can I be an optimist with all these things going on around me? And how can you simply say, don't worry, be happy? Well, what we're really talking about is avoiding extremism. We certainly don't want someone as a leader or even as an individual contributor who is always an optimist even when things are failing and they're not doing anything about it. Well, I'm not going to worry about it. I hope it'll get better tomorrow. That is absolutely not what we're talking about. We also don't want the person on the other end of the extreme saying things like, well, it's never going to work. There's nothing I can do. Why even try? So we want to have an objective balance that, of course, helps us to be more productive. But we also want to make sure in that balance that we're not injecting negativity when we should be motivated to figure out how to solve problems, how to reduce conflict, how to help our team be happier, more satisfied, more engaged, more motivated. Because those are the types of issues that leaders take care of, and those that are more emotionally intelligent are more likely to lean toward. So while we ought to make sure that there's balance, we want to lean toward more positivity, particularly where there's no reason or very little reason to be negative. And instead of being negative, let's jump in and figure out how to solve problems so we can be more positive. One of the things we want to consider is the fact that we are always making an impact. What we need to decide is whether we want to make a positive impact or a negative impact. Whether we want to leave a legacy that's positive or one that is negative. Although some of us don't like to admit it, many of us are greatly concerned with the first impression that is made to a new acquaintance. The impact we leave can be the difference between getting and not getting a job, or obtaining or not obtaining a contract for your company. Getting a promotion and not getting a promotion. So here's some factors to keep in mind when meeting someone for the first time, whether it's through digital or electronic means or face-to-face. Physical appearance. It's unfortunate but true that when you are in a face-to-face meeting, and this includes a Teams meeting or Zoom meeting or whatever, you are initially judged on your physical appearance. Always err on the side of caution and present yourself in a conservative light. Avoid flamboyant clothing, jewelry, makeup, because even though you may be confident in your abilities, these things can send a message that you are not professional and not capable of performing the job. Now, some would say that's not fair and not reasonable, and we're not going to debate that in this webinar. But we want to make you aware of the impact that you might be making, and then you can certainly have the choice to decide how you want to deal with that impact. Body language. Many times body language speaks so much louder than words. From posture, facial expressions, the message being conveyed can be completely different from the intended message. So it's important to be aware of how your body is positioned as well as the messages it is giving. In addition to posture and facial expressions, be mindful of your eye contact, your tone, and the pitch and speed of your voice. Although posture and eye contact may not be as important when you are communicating on the phone, your facial expressions can be very apparent. Smiling while talking is an easy thing to do, and it says that you are professional. It says that you are confident. The first handshake should be firm enough to show you're confident, but not so firm that it cuts the circulation off of the other person's fingers. Be sure to include good eye contact while you are shaking hands. Spoken words. This is one of the more obvious but neglected aspects of the first impression. Focusing too much time on your physical appearance or body language can cause you to forget to choose your words carefully. Choosing words carefully is not about you withholding your true self, but remembering there are some situations that require you to be more politically correct or proper. Stay away from the slang that you would use with friends or in other less formal situations. Also avoid using too much jargon or words not typically used in everyday language, as they may cause the listener to tune out, or they just won't understand you, and that can create a problem for you in terms of the impact you're making. Emotional intelligence is about being able to assess the situations you're in. It's about understanding what can work for you and what might not be working. Understanding yourself, understanding that your emotions are valid, but how you react to them drives your success. How your emotions can impact your thoughts. How are you able to be a good self-manager of not only your body, your emotions, your thoughts, but understanding the emotions of others and the needs of a particular situation. We want to make sure that we can assess a situation, have a deep and powerful understanding of ourselves, and understand what is going on around us and how we're impacting that situation. We want to be positive, but not overly so. We certainly want to manage negative emotions so we aren't easily ready to give up or to give in. We want to be active listeners so we can understand what's being communicated to us, so we can communicate to others in a manner that's most productive for us and for our organizations. If we aren't able to do that, no matter how good we are, how smart we are not going to be as successful as we otherwise might be if we were more emotionally intelligent. So think about this for a minute. Who is going to be most successful if you take a group of highly successful engineers who are in the graduating class of MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? They're all straight A students. They all did very well in their classes. How do you determine who is more emotionally intelligent? That's what determines the likely success of those individuals. So to wrap up this webinar, it's important to note that emotional intelligence is not something that we are suggesting in order to eliminate or ignore competence or training or becoming a subject matter expert. It's a tool you can use so you can understand yourself while also understanding others and the impact you are having on every situation that you are engaged in. So you're not getting in the way of that competence you already have, but instead you're taking advantage of that competence to communicate and convey what your needs are, what your desires are, in order to be more successful as an individual contributor or as a more successful leader. That's what emotional intelligence is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar. And as always, I see you.